Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Implementing Zero Trust and Mitigating Insider Threats, Microsoft Cloud Best Practices, featuring cybersecurity expert Michael Noel. My name is Vlad Katrinescu. I'm Syskic's technical evangelist and a Microsoft MVP from Montreal, Canada. Also here with me is Michael, who will be showing you a demo of Syskit Point later on. Now, a lot of you might already know Syskit Point as a company, but for those who don't, let me briefly introduce you. Syskit is a software development company founded more than 15 years ago. We currently have more than 3,500 customers around the world, ranging from small businesses to large corporations. Our flagship product, Syskit Point, is a scalable platform that helps you simplify your Microsoft 365 visibility, governance, and security. Whether you need detailed reports, real time management reports, activity auditing, optimizing storage, usage, and more, Syskit Point has you covered. Now, before we start with the fun stuff, just a few housekeeping items. All registrants will receive a recording of the webinar within a few days. After Michael's presentation, Michael will give us a short demo of how Syskit Point can help you manage and enforce access control, ensuring that the right people always have the right level of access to the right resources. And of course, at the end, we'll have a Q&A session where Michael will answer any questions that you may have. So please use the Q&A function on the right side of the screen to ask your questions. And Michael is an expert in the field, so bring your toughest questions that you have. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Michael Noel. Michael Noel is a world renowned cybersecurity expert who has presented at over 300 events in over 84 countries and on every continent. He's the author of over 20 books on IT topics and brings a wealth of knowledge on digital security and infrastructure to organizations around the globe. I'll now give a warm welcome to Michael. Michael, are you ready?
I'm all ready. Yes. Thank you for that
Awesome.
intro.
Well, take it away.
Can see the presentation screen, Vlad?
Yep,
All right.
all
Sounds
is
good.
good to go.
All right. So it's a very early morning to those who are on the West Coast. So good morning and good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're coming in from the world today. As Vlad mentioned, just a bit of a background about who I am. I've been working within the Microsoft space, well, for a very long time, unfortunately. And fortunately, I've been fortunate enough to work in Microsoft cybersecurity as well, specifically for about the past 10, 15 years or so. Prior to that, I did a lot of work in SharePoint infrastructure space. So I used to write a bunch of books, the SharePoint Unleashed series. That's one of my series. 20 different books from Sam's Publishing over the years, and then eventually started to parlay that into presentations around the world. As mentioned in the intro, I've done presentations in 84 different countries. I believe, although I can't really prove it, that I've presented in more countries than any other non-religious speaker, because somebody called out that the Pope has probably presented in more places. But hey, moving on. Let's actually get into the heart of this here, because one of the things that I like to tell a lot of my clients is that we're seeing a evolution in the types of threats that these cyber criminals are starting to utilize. And part of that is because cyber criminals are actually using the same artificial intelligence that we're using to improve and make us more successful. They're starting to use those same cybersecurity and AI tools to basically hack us more efficiently. So this is creating a lot of different concern, and it's really starting to have organizations go towards the concept of zero trust. And we'll talk more about what zero trust means in the Microsoft space and what zero trust means kind of in general, and why that's a concept that you should be taking a look at. But let's dive into this here and kind of understand, the impact as we've moved into this hybrid environment. It becomes less of a perimeter-based approach to the way that we look at things. The traditional way of looking at things was we've got the good guys on the inside, we've got the bad guys on the outside, and never the twain shall meet. But the reality is that it's becoming very, very challenging to actually determine who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and where are they within the organization. And you throw remote work into that, which of course COVID kind of really threw remote work into that. You get a situation where it's really hard to tell, are these the good guys? Are they the bad guys? A lot of the good guys, in fact, in some cases, most of the good guys are going to be coming from outside of the network anyway nowadays. And not only that, many organizations have just retired their data center, moved them up into the cloud, moved either completely cloud dependent, or they only have some components that are running on-prem and other components that are in the cloud, and they're kind of in this mixed environment like that. So that traditional perimeter type security, where I turn on my firewall, I set up my rules to block traffic from the outside, that really isn't going to work when the attackers have all these different ways of getting in. They have shared keys on AWS. They have the different ways of getting in. They have ways of taking over credentials, taking over people's usernames and passwords. I've still seen clients out there just using username and password, which I find absolutely amazing nowadays, because that's just inviting yourself to get hacked. So we're starting to see all these modern attacks being, combined with the fact that we don't know where the users are coming from, and it becomes harder and harder to kind of understand what's legitimate traffic and what isn't legitimate traffic. So a few of the techniques, just to kind of understand first, what are these cyber criminals doing? One of the things that we've seen a lot of recently is this concept of something called spear phishing. And what spear phishing is that it's an evolution of the phishing concept. Phishing being, I'm trying to get someone to just essentially click on a link. Spear phishing is, and give up their credentials. So like, here, we're your bank. And you may have noticed, by the way, AI makes it a lot easier for them to just to make sure that they're not making any spelling mistakes on those. It used to be so easy to tell when it was a phishing email, because there'd be spelling mistakes, and okay, your bank is not going to make all these spelling mistakes. But nowadays, there's some incredibly convincing emails that come in. I've gotten to the point where I tell my clients, anything that comes in email, don't click on any of the links. If you really think that it's legitimate, just go off to that website, log in, and do what you need to do. But spear phishing goes after individuals within your organization. So the spear phishers will be going after your executives. They'll be going after your financial, the people who run the finances within the organization. And so because they're doing this, a lot of times they'll go, they'll be getting the credentials of someone that can really do some damage within the organization. You think about it, your CEO may have some elevated rights, may have access to financial systems that they shouldn't have access to, may be able to do big bank transfers and things like that. There was a fairly famous instance of a Hong Kong bank where someone used basically deepfake videos of the executives within that bank to convince someone on the finance team to send a really large payment over to the hacker's bank. So that's the kind of thing that we see with these spear phishing, is these realistic type of things. And the resources that are at their disposal are enormous, because in a lot of cases, these are state-sponsored entities. So you actually get these hacking farms in places overseas where they're deliberately going in and essentially trying to raise funds. Now, they may be countries that are outside of the banking sectors for one reason or another. They're under sanctions. They're doing bad things on the internet. They're starting wars, things like that. But there's also just sometimes it'll happen in countries that are considered to be relatively not necessarily enemies of the state, that kind of thing. and they're just kind of, it's tacitly allowed in some of those countries because they know that it's bringing money in. So we'll see some of that in Africa sometimes in certain places where some of the hacking attacks come from there. And it's by the way, it doesn't just target NGOs and political people. It's targeting everybody nowadays. You know, you've probably seen it. You've seen the increase in phishing emails and stuff like that. They're going after everybody, and that's just because they have the resources now to do that type of thing. And one of the primary ways in which these cyber criminals are making money is through the concept of ransomware. Once they get a hold of your credentials that you've given up through the phishing attack, they then go to see what kind of systems you have access to. All the systems you have access to outside of your network, they then go there, try to identify, especially if there's some key systems. And in a perfect world, they go after the crown jewels, which are the admin rights. They go after the main set of admin rights because the more systems they can affect, the better. So if they get a hold of someone who's an Active Directory domain admin, great. Now they can go and push their ransomware off to every domain connected system on the network. And I've seen that happen, and that will effectively shut an organization down. It shut my local bank down for I think 2 weeks. They were out, and that was not fun, suffice it to say. But and that was relatively recent. That was, I think, less than a year ago now at this point. So, and by the way, pay the ransom. You don't necessarily even get access to your data back. There's a fairly famous case of a pipeline manufacturer down in Texas who got hit by ransomware, paid the ransom, but it was a single-threaded decryption process, and so they couldn't decrypt it in time. They actually still had to go back to the backups to restore things. So, if you ever do get hit, I would highly advise not paying the ransom. I'm pretty sure our bank did not pay the ransom, but hey, that's what it is. Device theft is an issue. That's always been an issue, of course, but they're getting much more sophisticated in the way that they go about the device theft. One of them is by using Bluetooth trackers. Another one, by the way, is they'll go follow the truck that they know has like Apple devices on it. And by the way, a common thing that thieves will do nowadays, even the porch pirates, as they call them, are getting more sophisticated. They actually will have these Wi-Fi disruptors, and they'll bring the Wi-Fi disruptor up to the house, and it'll take out the Ring camera, so you can't actually see who they are. So all the more reason to get a wired security system if you're worried about porch pirates. But you see this identity theft. You see, if you don't have encryption on your devices, you're in big trouble. I mean, there's a lot of different requirements around. If you have customer data, for example, on your laptop, you now have to identify to that customer that it's been lost. So those create some major issues for organizations. This one is unfortunately doesn't get a lot of people looking at it, but it is a huge issue. And in some cases, and by some variables that you look at, it can be the majority of the intellectual property loss that's out there. So in other words, most intellectual property loss is not actually nefarious. It's not somebody going in, hacking in, breaking in, and doing things. It's actually a concept that we call oversharing. So it's somebody sending an email where in the email thread somewhere in there's a link to a file, and that email gets sent to the wrong person, and that wrong person then gets access to that file and can actually access your IP, your sensitive IP. So those kind of things, that's where you really start to kind of need solutions that will address those type of oversharing situations. So, and at the same time, we are rooted in a concept. Most organizations nowadays are terrible at passwords. We are not doing our passwords properly, and we're not doing justice to our end users. I've been harping on this for a few years here, but I'm telling you, as IT, the number one thing is we should not be forcing our users to constantly change their passwords. It sounds counterintuitive, but the reality is what we should be doing is encouraging them to have a unique password that's only used within that environment, and using a concept like a passphrase. So passphrase would be something like yellow birdseed hat pumpkin. It's a lot easier to remember that. In fact, I remember that specific passphrase. I've been using it for a while during these presentations because you can just create a mnemonic in your head of yellow birdseed on a hat on a pumpkin, and then that's your password. It ends up being a very long password, but it's much easier for a human to remember and much more difficult for a computer or a hacker to try to decrypt it. So, but when people reuse passwords, this presents a massive challenge, and it creates a perfect front door for these hackers to come in, because they'll have, they'll know the hash. They know these known good hashes, and they know the hashes of the 1 billion passwords that are on the dark web. These are stolen passwords that end up in stolen password breach databases, and they end up on the dark web. And one of the first things the hackers do is attempt to log in with those. And a lot of people will use the same passwords across multiple services. So you really want to make sure your password is unique. And I do recommend the use of white hat hacking sites like habitandpwn.com if you want to test out your passwords. I would say throw some old passwords in there, by the way, just to see what kind of breaches are out there. And you can see, throw the password you're using back in the 90s. That for sure is going to show up in here. Cached credentials is another method that's unfortunately really, really common, and is a way that a lot of organizations lose access to this. And it's one of the reasons why Zero Trust is so important, is that many of these applications rely on this concept of cached credentials. They rely on having the credential on the machine itself when it can't talk back to, let's say, like a domain controller, or within an application, cached within the application, or cached within memory. Our devices, when phones, for example, you'll have that kind of stuff cached, like your PIN will be cached in memory after you've used biometrics to get into a phone, for example. For the same reason, this is why whenever I cross a border, I always switch off the biometrics. That's 5 clicks of the power button on an iPhone. Android's a little bit more challenging, but you can do that very quickly in your pocket, by the way. A lot of people don't realize that. Reach into your pocket, feel the power button, click it 5 times. That turns off your biometrics temporarily, by the way. It'll go back on the next time you enter your PIN. But moving back to cached credentials, give you a very common example we see about how organizations get hacked. They bring their laptop over to the help desk, the service desk, and an admin logs into their laptop and fixes a problem, gives it back to them. That admin's credentials, by default, unless you've done some due diligence, are cached on that person's machine. It's meant to help that admin log in again if they need to log in. Well, that's exactly what an attacker needs. They get a hold of Bob, and Bob is a lowly whatever, but Jane, the admin, had logged into Bob's machine, and Jane's credentials are cached on there. And now that hacker has what they need to go in and ransomware the entire organization. So cached credentials, be very cautious about that. I also have a good friend who works for one of these IDS company, or they go in and attempt to or do penetration tests, and they say that cached credentials are how they get in 90% of the time. So look for cached credential threats that are out there. Because, I talked about what these users are doing. They're doing lateral threats. They're going out there and they're getting on one system. They're trying to move to another system. The famous Sony Pictures hack that went out there, where they just leveled Sony Pictures to their IT environment to the ground. They had to rebuild everything. They had to crack open the Windows Server, software, start a brand new Active Directory for us, because they just lost everything. But that actually took 2 weeks of them being in there, right? And not realizing that they were within the organization and moving laterally from one system to next until they had all of the access that they needed. They downloaded all the files that they needed, and Sony Pictures didn't realize that was happening at the same time. They didn't catch them until suddenly they triggered everything and just leveled it to the ground. And this is, by the way, things like in a Microsoft environment, we also see things like golden ticket attacks. There's tools out there, Mimikatz tools, for example. There's other these open source tools that can be used to identify and gather, especially when you're on a network. All the more reason not to trust the people on the network is when they're in there internally, they have access to a lot more information than you would think they would normally be able to have access to. So, what do we do? What types of things can we do to protect the organization? I wanted to first kind of jump into this. I keep talking about zero trust. What does it actually mean? In a sense, of course, it means what it sounds like it means. It means I don't trust anybody. I'm suspicious immediately from anyone that's accessing any type of resource within my organization. So it's really that's why the slogan of zero trust is never trust, always verify. you always want to make sure that you're putting, anyone who's accessing any of your resources through this. And you always want to, the key principles of this are verify explicitly, through multiple factors, enforced least privilege, which is, it's so hard for us in IT to do this because we hate doing this. We hate not being admin. We hate being, we want to have, sudo. We want to have domain admin. We want to be able to do everything that we need to do and not be stymied by lack of admin rights. But at the same time, we lose our credentials, and boy, that's a lot of things, a lot of damage that a hacker can do. So enforce least privilege, and we'll talk a little bit more about how some of the Microsoft tools can do that. Assume breach. You have to constantly assume that you've been breached or that you're under breach, or you put yourself into a monitoring posture. Sure, it's going to make it a lot harder to relax when you're on vacation, but come on, we work in IT. Nobody gives us vacation or holiday time, right? Granular control, reduced attack surface, real-time threat detection. Those are kind of some of the benefits of having access to a zero trust environment. And then, the type of insider threats that you can expect are, can be malicious, negligent, like I talked about, things like just oversharing, or compromised systems. Again, you always have to assume that we've got some kind of compromise within your organization. And that's where we look at how the role of zero trust in detecting and mitigating those types of insider risks, and then being able to kind of do the analytics for anomaly detection. So Microsoft Sentinel, Microsoft 365 Defender. We'll talk a little bit more about those tools as we go through it. So, I mentioned militia, these different tools. This is more of a repeat of the same thing. So I'm going to just move on. Let's talk a little bit more about securing identities in your endpoints. So in a Microsoft world, and again, I'll dive into more of these tools in a little bit more detail. We're talking about things like Azure AD Conditional Access policies. Actually, these are one of your, an Azure AD or Entra ID, as they call it now. I should update this. Conditional access policy allows you to have much more control over the factors going into things. So it's not just username and password, for example, and you're probably at least, hopefully nowadays, using username and password in some MFA form, which we'll talk about. But it's also being able to do these kind of create conditional access policies based on your device that you're coming in from, your geo that you're coming in from, if you're coming in from a different continent, if you're coming in from a known bad entity or things like that, if you're coming in from a VPN exit point, which may be a sign that you're a bad actor trying to fool that you're coming in from the Netherlands instead of from Russia or something like that. Those are all done through Azure AD Conditional Access policies, and that's really one of your main tools for setting up zero trust, is you can create all those different factors. MFA, which again we'll talk about in more detail, but this is critical nowadays. You absolutely have to have MFA in place, but there's good MFA and there's bad MFA, and we'll talk about what that is. Microsoft, from within the Microsoft tool frame, there's also Endpoint Manager, or Intune, as it's more commonly known. This can help you enforce device compliance. So if something's wrong with the device itself, if you have an older version of the antivirus running on it, for example, you can actually have a conditional access policy that doesn't give you access to some of the more critical resources until you update that, for example. And Defender for Endpoint, which again we'll talk about more detail, but this is Microsoft's endpoint set of tools for defending you, against antivirus and anti-malware and those type of advanced threats, and being able to respond against them more effectively. So when it comes for zero trust for your applications and your data, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, this is a fantastic tool. We're actually going to take a look at it. I use it all the time. This helps you to understand, especially in the modern environments when we're using all these cloud solutions all the time, what we're accessing. Do I create conditional access policies for different types of applications based on risk or severity? Those can all be managed and monitored through the cloud. I can see how much data is flowing to these different cloud applications. Role-based access control, which is having the person's role define what it is that they gain access to. I've seen some complex RBAC type of environments that are out there today. I don't think you necessarily need to get super complex with this, but it is kind of useful to have when you have let's say a new person start within the organization, and you just drop them into a few groups, and that gives them rights to everything they need because you have all your RBAC set up properly. And they don't have any additional rights that they don't need, and you're not doing these one-off permissions in data and things like that. And then information protection policies. This is in the Microsoft Purview suite, which we'll talk about a little bit more detail, but this is about classifying your data, labeling your data, encrypting your data automatically. So you can do things, you can actually create policies that when someone accesses the data, that it implies certain encryption to it and restrictions on the application, so that Word, for example, the print button is grayed out or the save as button is grayed out, and then you can apply different levels of encryption based on the conditional access policy. That's another factor that you can implement as part of this. And then DLP, really this is about data loss prevention, preventing that kind of sensitive data exfiltration. That's similar, what I was talking about with the grayed out print button and those types of things. Those are a form of DLP policies. At the same time, Zero Trust really requires continuous monitoring. We're talking about 24/7 type of support. Some organizations that I've worked with have contracted with a managed services provider, so MSSP or managed security services provider, that will actually be there 24/7 watching your environment and responding to threats. And some of the Microsoft Cloud tools make it really easy and useful to do that. So we see that a lot. We'll see different, Microsoft Sentinel, which I'll talk about in more detail here, but this is a great tool as a SIEM to be able to provide for that kind of threat detection and response using Custo query language queries that are fairly easy to make, AI-driven insights. There's actually in the Microsoft, we would talk about AI, there's a whole Microsoft suite of Copilot for security that can be used to kind of automatically use AI to identify those kind of threats and those types of things. And then automated remediation using things like Azure Logic Apps, Azure Functions, that will do things based on certain criteria. So to kick off a specific type of automatic remediation. And incident response best practices, those are things like looking back and saying, okay, how did we respond to this crisis? What types of changes can we make to our CA policies to stop someone from getting access to what they gained access to, and those types of things. So in terms of the roadmap for implementing your Zero Trust policies, it really is kind of a 4-step process. We have an assessment phase where you go through and assess the current environment. Inventory, this is huge. It's shocking to me how often organizations have no clue about what's out there and what's actually their stuff versus what's like personal stuff. There's a blurring line between, bring your own device and then what's an actual company device. I've seen a lot of Excel spreadsheets that are used for inventory management and things like that. This really shouldn't be the case. I mean, Excel is used for a lot of stuff, as you know, but there are better inventory management tools out there. Identify the gaps that are there, identify where the gaps are in our visibility, where our gaps are in our coverage, what are we doing properly with the devices, what are we not doing with devices, and then start your Zero Trust out on a pilot basis. Don't just push it out to everybody all at once. Create a group, put the CA policies on them, test how that's going to work, test if that's going to break certain applications. I've certainly seen it do it that way sometimes. You think you're creating a perfect CA policy, and next thing you know, the browser that they're using just suddenly stops working properly because it doesn't have the proper add-in or what have you. So pilot it out and then scale it up. The last part is to scale and automate, extend the Zero Trust across the organization. And by the way, it's not a zero-sum game with this. Zero Trust, you can, as long as you start to put it out in pieces, it's better than nothing. It's better than having nothing in place and letting someone get inside the perimeter of your organization and just go wild and start to access a ton of resources out there. So common challenges with Zero Trust that we've seen. Number one, this is always the case in any IT project, and that's cultural and organizational resistance. Nobody wants to change the way that they're doing things. Nobody wants to move their icon around on the screen for God's sake. They don't even like it when you when you push out a new tool, like, oh no, you gave me a new version of Word. I like the old version. Like, come on, we got it. You were using Word 97, sir. Suffice to say, there's always organizational resistance. And then other challenges are things like complex identity and access policies. Don't overcomplicate things. I've seen people get into this and they say, we're going to create these super complicated conditional access policies, and it's going to have all these factors that go into it, and we're going to do this and this and this. At the end of the day, guess what happens is things break, executives start yelling, you start creating exceptions to your policies, and all of a sudden you're breaking holes in those zero trust barriers. And we've seen that happen all the time. So start smaller, start with a more targeted set of conditional access policies, build them out, and don't necessarily get overzealous in how you're creating this. Other challenges, visibility gaps. Shadow IT is a constant threat. It's always out there. You find out that the finance people have set up their own server because they could. It's that kind of thing. You want to really limit, and subsequently what goes along with that, limit who has rights to be able to create these resources, particularly in the cloud, or else you're going to get that very large Azure or AWS bill in the mail from Microsoft. And it's really easy to blow through credits quickly, as a lot of your people know. And another challenge is really that continuous change management. We're used to this kind of very, very regimented change management policies in a lot of organizations. Okay, we're going to be deploying once every 3 years. We deploy major sets of applications. We run through all this change management. Well, it's a lot harder to do that with zero trust. You have to be a lot more flexible, and you have to be able to create and modify policies very quickly. That can create its own issues. Particularly if you're in the middle of a breach, you need to start locking things down. I mean, that can affect people, and you need to define what that looks like. You need to define what emergency CRs look like for change control and things like that. So in the Microsoft space, let's take a look at some of the pillars of Microsoft Zero Trust, kind of these ideas that Microsoft's latched around. And a lot of it kind of ties into what you see from that particular diagram there, is that Microsoft kind of defines, you've got these different factors that are out there. One of the factors is the identity. It's that user itself, right? And ideally, again, that user is using some form of multi-factor authentication. Maybe you've got YubiKeys, hardware keys, so that they physically have to be there. Maybe you're relying just on the Microsoft Authenticator app. Maybe you're relying on some other, form of authenticator, like an Okta app or things like that. But you need to kind of define that identity and, have those other factors that kind of play into it. The user session risk, which are things that can be part of CA policies. And then the devices. What device are they coming from? Are they coming from a bring your own device, which maybe has a lot more restrictions on it? Or are they coming from a corporate managed device that's managed within Intune, and we know when we can control things on it, like the antivirus levels and things like that? Part of that, of course, is having that device inventory, but also the device risk state. What is the state of the risk? How out of patch compliance is it? How out of antivirus is it? Is there a problem with the encryption that's on it? It's not properly BitLockered or file vaulted properly, or something like that. And then all of that kind of keys into that security policy enforcement. So the organizational policies, the threat intelligence type policies, and how you're accessing the data. The labeled, ideally the labeled and the classified data, so that okay, this data you can access, this data you can't access, the different applications, the different infrastructure, and the different networks that are out there. You're still, in most cases, going to have on-premises networks, or you may even just have networks that are in the cloud as well too, that need to be handled and treated using the same processes. So kind of use some of those pillars: the identity, the applications, the data, infrastructure, networking, visibility, and analytics. Those kind of some of the key points within Microsoft Zero Trust. And within the Microsoft field of security tools, which is something that I spent a lot of time working with, I want to kind of go through a few of the key ones here. There's what Microsoft calls Microsoft 365 Defender. You may have known some of these tools by some of their old names, so I've thrown some of the old names that are up there. But we've got Defender for Cloud App, which I mentioned, we'll take a look at. So that's that cloud-based, looking at all the different cloud tools. This user uploaded 40 gigs to Dropbox, for example, or this user, is accessing these particular sites and doing these particular things. just had a client the other day ask me, show me all the users that are accessing LLMs, and that can be very easily done with the Defender for Cloud app. Defender for Endpoint, this is that endpoint detection tool. It's basically like a centralized way of accessing the Defender tool set that runs natively on Windows 10 and 11, but also has some additional features when you deploy it as part of a Defender for Endpoint strategy. That's also, by the way, what feeds the metrics into Defender for Cloud Apps. So there are some tie-ins and overlaps between these. Defender for Office 365, those are just protecting SharePoint and Exchange and some of those other tools in the cloud. And there's also a Defender for Identity tool, which is kind of interesting tool that you install if you still have an on-prem environment. You install in your domain controllers, and it'll send alerts up into the cloud to tell you when there's things going on within your environment, like a golden ticket attack or those types of things. And Microsoft's added a new tool set called Defender for Vulnerability Management. One of my favorite parts of the vulnerability management tool is the certificate sweep. It'll go through and find all the certificates and send the administrators alerts of when they're going to expire, because we've all been there where we've had a certificate expire on, let's say, I don't know, December 25th. And by the way, who creates a certificate and they know when they look at the expiration date that it expires on December 25th? You're just asking for someone to have to be coming in on the holidays. But and I would throw that out to anybody in IT. When you create a certificate, just make sure you time it so that the end date is like the middle of the week for someone, if they do forget. But I'm going off topic here, so because that's kind of a poignant thing for me. Other areas within the Defender suite, there's actually this whole section of thing called Defender for Cloud. Yes, these are real tools, and yes, these are the real names of those tools. Yes, there is a Microsoft Defender for open source relational databases. Most of these are, they used to be called Azure Defender for obvious reasons. These are Azure-based tools. So if you have an Azure service that you deploy and it's doing some kind of a security tool set that's part of it, like you're deploying Azure SQL and it's got some things that are looking for injection attacks and those types of things. That's Microsoft Defender for SQL, for example. Those are the cloud-based Microsoft Defender tools that you can use. And Defender for Cloud App. Again, it's what they call a CASB, but of course Microsoft has to create their own acronym. So MDCA, which sounds like a party drug or something, but that's the acronym that they. I used to like MCAS. I liked it when they called it MCAS, but they don't anymore. So now it's MDCA. Like I said, a cloud access security broker, and it's going to be able to identify the threats across and in between platforms. This is, once you get this, you never want to go back, by the way. This is a fantastic tool for kind of getting a better understanding and alerting about which applications your end user is using. Also set limitations. You can put these into conditional access policies. Like I was saying earlier, all of these things can be integrated together. Or you can even have a conditional access policy that, for example, says, we're going to allow them to use Dropbox, but we're going to not allow them to upload too much data. Like there's a limit on the amount of data that goes into these things. So that's all kind of fed into by the metrics that come in from Defender for Cloud App. The vulnerability management tools, I mentioned this. I mentioned the certificate side of this. But overall, this is an inventory tool. Talk about inventory being a problem with most organizations. It'll help to remediate vulnerabilities in applications, browser extensions, and in those discovered certificates. So you can create the security baselines and remediation packages, and again, tie in conditional access policies into Defender for Vulnerability Management. And if you don't already have a SIEM, a Security Information and Event Management Platform, I do highly recommend Microsoft's. We've been using it at different organizations today. It is an extremely powerful SIEM, particularly if you're in a Microsoft-heavy environment. You can feed all of the logs from all of your different resources into the cloud, into a logs analytics workspace. You can save them. You can save them in some cases for up to 2 years. You can even data warehouse them for even 10 years beyond that. So if you have critical logs, if you're in a highly regulated environment, if you're working in pharmaceutical or banking or things like that, and you need to be storing everything that people are doing, store that that Azure Unified Audit log, store that off in Sentinel, pop it over there. You can go in and do Custo queries against it, show people who did what, when. That Unified Access log is fantastic if you haven't taken a look at it, but it's basically telling you every time anyone does anything, within the Microsoft space. So if you want to kind of go back in and identify, oh, this user was compromised, what is it that they did, you can immediately pull that information out of Sentinel or out of the Unified Access Log, but that's going to expire after 90 days. You get most users will get 90 days. If it's an E5, they get up to a year. But some people don't realize you can actually buy a 10-year license on top of that for certain users, or you can put your users under legal hold in certain cases. But Sentinel is that kind of SIEM platform that then gathers the logs from those sources and also from your firewalls and from other places. You can have logs sent in from AWS and other third-party applications, and then gives you that alerting, that place to do all the alerting from, and to be able to put in different, or go and do hunting. There's a place where you can actually do hunting and try to look for nefarious activities. This is, again, where your MSSP can come in handy. If you give them access into Sentinel, you give them guest accounts that can go in and be able to do things. But it's a critical part of kind of a centralized Microsoft security platform. And then there's other tools that will do that just-in-time type access. One of the Microsoft tools for this is called Entitlement Management. I did not name this. I don't necessarily like the name. It seems a little bit clunky, but it is kind of a place that allows better the kind of access packages and just-in-time access. And one of the components of entitlement management that you may be familiar with, and that if you're not using, you should be using, is called PIM, Privileged Identity Management. That is a great tool for where you have to elevate to become like a global admin, or to elevate to one of the other admin levels within your Azure environment, so that if your credentials are compromised, the hackers aren't going to immediately have access to all the crown jewels of your Azure environment, because there's nothing worse than getting locked out of your Azure environment because the hackers came in and got rid of all the other admins and replaced them with themselves, which I've seen happen, and is not a good, it's not a good look for the organization. Multi-factor authentication. I talked about this, but I wanted to kind of talk about security of MFA. SMS is better than nothing, but it's not very secure, because there's a concept called SIM swapping that's actually way too easy, and you're relying on the security of that person's mobile phone provider. So we don't necessarily recommend it. We do recommend things like biometrics, authenticator apps, Microsoft Authenticator. People are using that a lot because it'll do push out and where you enter in the code. There's also, that's an industry standard, so you can actually use any other one like Google Authenticator or 1Password, or one of the other ones that has the Authenticator functionality built in. But the passwordless approaches and the hardware keys, like a YubiKey, I mentioned those. There's other types of hardware keys. Those are really important, and I'll give you an example of how this actually came up in some of the security forums that were out there. Hackers have gotten so sophisticated in how they do this. There was one case where they saw a hacker that they sent a phishing email out. The person clicked on the phishing email. It took them to a Microsoft 365 sign-in page that looked very legitimate. They enter in the username. It then, in the background, checks the username with Microsoft, make sure that's legit. If it's legit, it comes back and says, okay, now what's your password? It checks the password. It checks that the password's legit, inputs it on behalf of that user, and then Microsoft immediately sends the MFA to that user's device. The user then plugs in their MFA. The hacker grabs the MFA, plugs it in. It's acting as kind of like a man in the middle at this point, and successfully takes over the MFA of that account. So this is where something like a hardware key, where they can't be fooled by that man in the middle attack, wouldn't work. That's why that's better than just your standard MFA with an authenticator app. So I do recommend organizations start to look to those types of things. You can also do these kind of keys that exist on devices, but they're only on specific devices, like pass keys. So that's kind of a next level approach as well too. And then Microsoft's actually pushing this concept of passwordless, where you just use the biometrics on the device together with potentially a pass key, and you can create that again as part of a conditional access policy. So they do consider that to be the most secure method of accessing your data. Okay, so real briefly, I want to make sure that there's time left for the questions at the end of this because I pretty much have to leave at the top of the hour here. So I'm going to briefly show you kind of some of the Microsoft security environments as well too. I wanted to focus a little bit on the cloud apps. So this is Microsoft Cloud App Security. Of course, it's I had to spin up this demo last night because, of course, my last presentation demo, they expire after 3 months. It expired 2 days ago, so lucky me. So there's not necessarily everything that's in here, but I suggest if you are an admin, take a look. Go to security.microsoft.com. Take a look at all of the different areas within here. You may have stuff in here a lot more than you realized. You may, one of the things I recommend organizations take a look at, if you haven't already taken a look at, is this content of your secure score. So it actually gives you some really actionable intelligence about what it is that you can do to improve the security of your organization. You can take a look at your devices, your assets that are in here. Of course, again, those are still being set up. A dashboard on the identities, which this would be a lot more interesting in an environment that has real data, but suffice it to say, my clients don't appreciate me showing their actual environments that are out there, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that. But then again, taking a look at the vulnerability management dashboard and then the cloud app security dashboard, which I promise you will have at least semi-decent information that's in there. I'm surprised it's taken it this long. Usually it only takes a couple hours for the demo tendency, and I put this in place last night. But you saw the screenshots earlier on. Suffice it to say, the idea, what I was going to show you is going into a cloud app, you can see which users are using it. You can see all these 10 users are using Dropbox, or these 10 users are using ChatGPT, and you can create policies that say, okay, we're not allowed to use LLMs unless it's a company-approved LLM, for example. And then you'll see the Sentinel. If you're licensed for Sentinel, Sentinel will show up within the space. It'll actually allow you to, set up the data connectors. So I can actually create the data connectors into your environment. Okay. So again, not too much to see there. I've got about 13 minutes left for questions. I want to real briefly do a quick takeaways thing here. Remember, the Zero Trust is a journey. Embrace iterative implementation. Don't try to bite it all off at the same time. Start small. Start with small conditional access policies. Work as a pilot. Build that up. Work within the Microsoft ecosystem. Use end-to-end tools. A lot of us will work heavily with Microsoft. Microsoft creates those end-to-end security tools to kind of do zero trust across all your identities. Those conditional access policies are from soup to nuts. They go from the laptop on the machine all the way up to SharePoint and Exchange Online and your on-prem services. Those are all kind of covered underneath the Microsoft ecosystem. And then, continuous verification and behavior analytics, those are critical for the insider threat mitigation. And consider the use of tools like Copilot for security or some of the other automation and AI tools that will help for scaling and allowing you to have the AI in control of things and to be able to separate the signal from the noise, which is a constant battle in anything security related. So I'm going to transition this up for questions. If your question doesn't get answered, or if you're watching this later, I suggest you reach out to me. You can reach out to me. LinkedIn is a great way to reach out to me as well too. I've got a couple different links up there, including a link to my travel blog if you're interested. I am one of only, I think, 452 people now that have been to every country in the world. I finished in the last country in the world last year, so travel's kind of a fun thing. So maybe I'll get to your neck of the woods if I haven't already been there. I mean, I'm expanding my definition of country. This is a whole other thing if you want to get into it. But what I mean by every country, I mean every United Nations member state. There's 193 of them. So, okay, thank you for your time, and let's transition to questions.
Hey, Michael, thank you, Michael, for the awesome presentation. Everyone, again, if you have any questions, submit them in the Q&A pane on the right side of the screen. Don't be shy. But before that, Michael, we're going to give you a 5-minute break to get a glass of water, and we'll have Michael from the Syskit team show you really quick how Syskit Point can help you manage and enforce access control. And meanwhile, everybody, put your questions in this way. We can have a ton of Q&A and hopefully ask your toughest questions for Michael Noel. He can answer everything. Michael, are you ready?
Yeah, can you see the screen?
Yes, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Michael, again for the great presentation and showing us how you can improve security by following best practices. And to expand on these topics, I'm now going to show a quick demo of SysKit. So for those who don't know, SysKit is a management and governance platform for M365. It helps companies of any size with fast-growing environments to get a better control over user access, inventory, and management across multiple M365 workloads, as well as enforce governance policies. And most importantly, it keeps your environment clean, properly governed, and secure. Okay, let's dive into the fun stuff and look at SysKit in action. So the first thing that opens up when you run Point is the home screen. It shows a lot of different information here about your environment, like for example, the user style, which shows you the total amount of users you have, how many admins you've got, how many external users you have, and so on. Okay, let's click on View All. This opens up the users overview, which shows all of your users in one place. Also, you can filter this out to see exactly what you need. For example, you want to only show external users, only inactive users, or other criteria. One of the more important being the administrator's view. This gives you a clear insight into who holds admin roles and enables you to restrict privileges to only what's necessary, minimize privilege creep where users accumulate access over time, and minimize blast radius in case something is being compromised. You can do all of this by using the various management actions that Point offers on all of its reports. And in this case, let's select a user. And here you can delete him, block his sign-in, or copy user's permission from one to the other. Also, you can do these actions in bulk, and their effect is immediate and visible in real time. Okay, let's say you want to manage privileged users that have elevated permissions like global admins or SharePoint admins to make sure they're at a minimum, or maybe revoke their access if it's no longer needed. That's a good practice if you want to minimize widespread impact, if they're misuse or compromise or something like that. To do this, you can go to the report center and check out our users reports. Just a second, for example, the user activity report. Okay, so when you run the report, in just a few seconds, you get a display of exactly who has access to what and which kind of roles you have in the environment. So for example, you find a workspace here that maybe has too many owners or something. You just click on the workspace, click on the change owner section, and here you can modify the owners. For example, remove some, add some, or whatever. And you click change, and again, the effect is immediate in real time, and you fix this on the spot. Okay, so let's jump back to Report Center. Let's say somebody accessed a confidential document on a team, but they shouldn't be able to. So maybe what could help you here to tackle the problem is the permissions matrix report. This allows you to see exactly who has access to what kind of content and drills down to the file level itself. For example, let's pinpoint a problematic team here, the design team. You click on Run Report, and again, in just a few seconds, you have the workspace and a lot of different information about it. Let's expand it all to go through a couple of it. Okay, so you see you have some owners here that have full control over the workspace. You have some members that have edit permissions. And for example, you find this sensitive document and see there's an external user that has edit permissions over the document. So you might want to remove his access or maybe edit his permissions so he doesn't have edit access but read-only access, so he can't make any changes. Also, if you have any sharing links here on that file, you can remove them just on the spot. Okay, let's jump back to the dashboard. So another big problem we mentioned in today's age is oversharing. It can cause data breaches and leaks, regulatory compliance violations, former employee risks, and many other problems, all of which are especially important if you want to adopt Copilot in your environment. So to keep on top of this, the Copilot readiness tile here shows you a lot of different information, like for example, how many sharing links you have, the total public workspaces, and other useful data points, all of which are drillable and open reports with easy to access actions for handling things on the spot. For example, we see we have 19 anonymous sharing links here. You just click on them and you see exactly where those links at, are, at which documents, at which workspaces, what kind they are, and you can also remove them here if you want to on the spot. Okay. Now let's say you need to troubleshoot why someone lost some permissions, or investigate a data breach that happened in the past, or maybe just track a user's activity. Our audit reports can help you with this. For example, the user activity reports. Okay, let's, for example, find this user we want to check out and select a period, for example, the last 30 days. You click on Run Report, and again, in just a few seconds, you have all of the activity the user did in the past 30 days. For example, if he removed somebody for a group, edited some permissions, access to file, or something like that. Also, all of these logs are expandable, and you can see all the details you may need depending on the action of the log. Also, what differs us here from Microsoft's audit is instead of the default 90 days, we offer up to a year of retention for the logs. Okay, and now if you want to be really proactive about governing your environment, you'll want to make use of our access review feature. So reviews allow you to make site owners do regular periodic reviews of their sites. So this is important because access evolves over time, and you should ensure the least privilege principle continuously and not just on onboarding. So you can request an access review in a workspace, which creates a task for its owners to complete. So let's say I'm an owner here and I open Point and I see I have this theme I need to perform access on, or a review on. So I just click on review. And then Point guides you to a step-by-step process where first you manage all of the members on the workspace. So you see there are some external users that maybe need to be removed from a group, or maybe somebody needs to be promoted from a member to an owner, or whatever you might need. Once you manage that, you go to the next step, which is the sharing step. This basically shows you the content of the workspace and all of the various users that have access to it. So you can expand on this and check things out if somebody has access over some documents. Also, you can do actions here like we just mentioned. And also, this is visible by a content view where you actually see content from the workspace and how it's accessible from the various outside points. For example, we have an external user here that has access to some file, some sharing links here we can remove, and so on. So you click on Next, Complete Review. And now you're an owner who confirmed they did a review on the workspace. Okay, so this is great because now your security team can have proof that an owner reviewed his site and made sure the users have minimum access they require, all of which you can nicely export in a PDF or Excel if you need. Also to mention, Point enables you to fully automate the different kinds of reviews here by using our rule engine feature. And this way you can have multiple different review periods that define what you want to review on a targeted site based on metadata, sensitivity labels, privacy, number of owners, and much more. And at the end of the day, IT teams may not have the internal knowledge to govern each site individually, and that's why we delegate this responsibility to site owners, which we consider is a best practice in terms of security. Okay, so this will be it. I think the time is up, so thank you all for the demo, and you can take it off.
Awesome, thank you so much. Michael, we do have a few questions for you. I hope you are ready. The first one we have is, can you restrict what data is inputted into the browser-based Gen AI apps, ChatGPT, Gemini, Anthropic, so on, via DLP policies and cloud app security?
The short answer is that would be challenging. The longer answer is that there may be certain things that you can do, but the reality is that you have visibility into, and you can restrict what specific tools people are accessing, and you can give them access to, for example, your own custom controlled LLMs, which is what I normally would recommend. So if you want them to be able to use a ChatGPT type of equivalent, you can spin up your own using something like Azure AI Search, which uses OpenAI under the surface anyway. So if you're concerned about them uploading data, that's what I would do. I would also use IRM policies that restrict You wouldn't be able to, for example, upload information from a sensitive document into an LLM if you had IRM policies in place, like rights management solutions. So there's not a perfect answer to that, just because of the way that the traffic goes between the client and the website in most LLMs. But there's a different solution that I would recommend. Like I said, like create your own LLMs, which is what we help organizations do a lot of nowadays. We'll create their own LLMs. We're operating off of company data. We put the company data in there as a data source, and then we allow you to do searches and be able to ask questions about the data in your own controlled environment.
Awesome. A follow-up question, which is in a way very similar. What tool can you use to prevent shadow AI, or at least to discover, are my people using ChatGPT, Gemini? What are they actually using, at least on the work computers?
Well, a way to kind of sew up and avoid shadow AI, or at least be aware of when it's out there, is if you have a conditional access policy that's very device-centric, that says I can only access company resources from known good devices that are, let's say, managed in Intune, then those devices will tattletale and tell you, hey, they're trying to access these other things, and you can create limitations on that, or you can at least use something like Defender for Cloud App to be able to identify all of those different tools and resources that they're using. So using conditional access policies together with a device, using device as one of the factors that's required, is how you would kind of gain control out of that. There's also other, network sniffing tools and IDS and other tools that you can put out there to kind of try to go out there and scan for those types of things, but that's more reactive than proactive. I'd say, having good policies in place is the best way to handle that.
Awesome. And one final question, which is a difficult one. I'm warning you, Michael. What license do we need for Defender products?
So generally speaking, you're going to need the E5, right? But there's also, if you're small businesses, there's small business licenses that include those. But there are also some a la carte licensing models for that. But yeah, most organizations that are using the Defender suite are just basically licensed with the E5, or the government equivalent of the E5, or the nonprofit equivalent of the E5. The nonprofit one is actually surprisingly cheap if you look at the licensing for nonprofit E5. But yeah, I would say in most cases, 90% of the cases, our clients that are using Defender are using E5s to access that.
Awesome. Well, this is it for the questions, and we are at time as well. And once again, thank you all for joining us on today's webinar. As mentioned, everyone that registered will get a recording of the webinar, so feel free to share it with your colleagues that could not attend. Michael, thank you very much again for taking the time and for today's presentation. Any final words you'd like to say before we wrap things up?
I just appreciate everybody's time, and hope to see you. I will be at Collab Summit in Germany next month, as well as the Thrive conference in Slovenia the week after that. So if you are in the neighborhood, please drop by. And I have a couple other plans. I think October I should be in South Africa for a couple different community events down there. So reach out, let me know, and hopefully make it to an event somewhere in the world where you are. And I'll see you in Germany, Vlad.
I'll see you in Germany for sure. And for everyone, thank you so much again for attending. If you have any additional questions about SysKit of any of our products, please reach out to sales@syskit.com. It was a pleasure having you all here today, and see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.